So, last night we had the brilliant Jonas from Shire. Jonas was on with my Academy and Mastery Program students talking about chords and how he interprets tunes and chord sequences. I learned a lot, and anyone that watches my channel knows that my chord knowledge is, well, it started out as let's hit it, and if it sounds good, do it again. And then hearing other people and going, that sounds really nice, I'm going to do that. So there's a little bit of that going on in this one today, because I'm going to go through some of the things that Jonas showed us and try and explain and break down exactly what's happening, keeping it as simple as possible. So these are essentially some really fun and interesting chord movements within tunes that add a little bit of color. So Jonas used George White's favorite as a base to describe some of these things. So we do need to learn the tune. So if you're on Patreon or you're on irishbanjolessons.com, head on over there. I got the simple notation. Good to get that down before you start adding chords to it, right? So let's jump into George White's favorites. In the key of E minor / G, starts with an E minor chord. A lovely thing we learned from Jonas was do an up stroke or an upbeat on an E minor 7. So what we're talking about here are lots of passing chords, lots of sevenths, clusters of 2-string chords that make for kind of descending and ascending counter melody harmonies that happen within the tune. Hope that makes sense. And then some very out of left field chord sequences that work really nicely. Now, I've talked about this in practically every video that I've ever done, and I use chords and chord movements and bassline movements a lot. Where Jonas brings something really special is having studied jazz guitar and having looked at the banjo players and the jazz players of the early 1920s in America. It's a particular sound. It's reminiscent of the Flanagan Brothers, reminiscent of early Dannon, and it's just really, really nice to play. It definitely catches the ear every time. So quick example before we get into the weeds is the second part of George White's. So it's just two little notes that happen, two chords. Really nice. Now what the tune does, that would normally be a D chord. And what we're doing here is putting in a C sharp, fret 4, down to a fret 3, C natural. And then resolving it to the G. To extend that a little bit, this one, we can put in a B flat. So we're creating an ascending note on the top line. Let's play the second part twice and show you your two options. So briefly, now don't forget, and here's how we're going to do the first part, is finishing the second part with the E minor 7. Leading to the E minor chord at the start of the first part. There's also a very nice D7 chord that you can pop into this. Now, one more time through that first part, starting with the E minor 7, E minor, D, G, E minor 7, E minor, D7, G, D. Now, the one that's completely out of left field and is magnificent, although it's hard to play in its full chord. It's replacing these bars, essentially the last two measures of the first part. So if you think about this in terms of its chord shape, it's G, D, G. So what Jonas taught us was to replace that GDG with an E major 7. Now, this one is a bit of a difficult one to get your fingers around. So it's a D note, fret 5 on the A string, fret 4 on the E string. Beautiful, isn't that lovely? And catching the E note on the D string. Now, when you play them all together, it sounds wonderful. So here's an E chord. And we're making it a 7 by putting in the D. So now it makes sense, right? So it's a E7 followed by an A7 followed by a D7 and back to the G. So I find this one hard to get my fingers around initially because that stretch with the pinky. If you just do them with two strings, it works pretty well, especially if you're doing this and other people are playing the tune. Right, so that's very straightforward, and you can hear how the chords are bunched together. Might sound a little bit mental on its own, but let's pop it into the tune and see what you think. You're either going to love it or hate it. Like I said, I find it pretty hard to get the first one. I will once I spend time with that shape. If that stretch is too much for that first chord, right? You could just play an E major chord and then put in the 7 of the A major. Right, so that allows you to leave your index finger on the E, and all you're doing is switching the G sharp to the G and putting a C sharp with it. That should make it easier, and really if you're doing this with other musicians playing the tune, it's not going to be massively noticeable if you catch the 7 or just the straight E major. Here's the whole thing together as one round of the tune with lots of these things thrown in, and then I'll do a slow version so that you can pick it out as well. Hope you like that.